YouTube. This is Kyle Graves Live. Please like and subscribe. This is a reaction video to RFK Jr. and his recent interview with Tucker Carlson. In this interview, and I'm not saying this is true or not, but RFK Jr. believes that Anthony Fauci created COVID in China. And this, so let's get to it. And let me know what you think. Comment, like, subscribe, and comment, and think for yourselves.
Sounds moderate and obvious. I just don't understand how the Secretary of State, how the president, how his competent advisors can't have reached the same conclusions. Like, what are they thinking?
Unfortunately, I think, and I share your sense of mystery about that, but I don't,
Because what you're saying is not crazy. It's not like some far out theory.
The only way I can explain it, and I'm not, I don't like to look into other people's heads and tell why they're doing one thing or another. But President Biden has always been a very pro-war president. And, he was the one senator that stood out supporting the Iraq war, my uncle and Obama and many, and Hillary also. But Biden has always been a reliable, gung-ho, let's go to war guy. And so I don't think, to the extent that he's thought this all through, I think it follows, it's consistent with his historical instincts. And then he's surrounded by people who are, these are the same people who got us in the Iraq war.
I know.
Look at what happened. Let me go through what happened in Iraq. Just for, give me 1 minute to summarize we were tricked into Iraq by the neocons, who told us that Saddam, who had something to do with the World Trade Center, which was a lie, that he had planted the anthrax attacks that came 5 days after the World Trade Center, which was a lie. That turned out to be the intelligence agencies and the U.S. military at Fort Detrick. That anthrax the FBI found came from Fort Detrick. So it was somebody in the U.S. government who sent it to Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle, who were the two senators in the week after 9/11 who were trying to block the Patriot Act. And it shut down Congress, and the Patriot Act went through. And
okay, so this is the beginning of him talking about how the government is into bioweapons.
And then they told us.
Wait. Really?
Yeah. Yes. And the FBI, after a year of investigation, traced the anthrax. It was a kind of Ames anthrax that was weaponized. And the only source of that in the world could be the U.S. government. And they traced it to Fort Detrick in
So the
Maryland.
biolab there.
Yes, the biolab at Fort Detrick, the CIA biolab at Fort Detrick. So somebody sent that in at the time the Patriot Act was being debated, and the two leading guys who were blocking it was Patrick Leahy and Tom Daschle were the recipients of it. It shut down Congress. The Patriot Act goes through, and what does the Patriot Act do? Two things. It basically gets rid of a large part of the United States Constitution, Bill of Rights, and allows spying by intelligence agencies on the American people, and it reopens the bioweapons arms race, because bioweapons were shut down in 1969 by, we saw, Nixon did this incredible thing of closing Fort Detrick, shutting them down, and saying we're no longer making bioweapons, and then got everybody to sign a treaty in 73. Well, to ban bioweapons. The Patriot Act has a provision in it that says we're not walking away from the Geneva Convention, which it's a hanging offense to develop bioweapons. We're not walking away from the Bioweapons Charter of 1972, 1973, but we are adopting a new rule that any federal official who violates those acts cannot be prosecuted. So it reopened, it effectively got rid of
A crime without a punishment.
Yeah, but anyway, I forgot where we.
So let me add, it's an interesting segue, because Toria Nuland kind of blithely announced during congressional testimony last year that, oh, by the way, we have these biolabs in Ukraine.
Yeah.
And that was kind of ignored, and the people who covered it got attacked for covering it. But the fact remains there are U.S. biolabs in Ukraine. Why would we have biolabs in Ukraine?
Okay, so here's where RFK goes into detail about Anthony Fauci and biolabs and creating bioweapons. And, it's not what you know, it's what you can prove. And so it's interesting to hear what he says right here. It's very alarming and disturbing, but it's like, can he prove this? If he could prove it, it would just be a game changer. But it's just like, he needs evidence to back this up. All right, let's continue.
We have labs in reclaim because we're developing bioweapons, and and those bioweapons are using all kinds of new synthetic biology and CRISPR technology and genetic engineering techniques that were not available to previous generation, and they can make frightening stuff. What happened was, when we walked away from, when the Patriot Act reopened the bioweapons arms race in 2001, the Pentagon began putting a lot of money into bioweapons, but they were nervous at that time because if you violate the Geneva Convention, it's a hanging offense. And they weren't sure that provision in the Patriot Act would actually hold up as a loophole to treaties that had been ratified by Congress. So they were nervous about actually going full force into bioweapons development. So they transferred the authority for biosecurity to one agency in the HHS called the National Institute for Infectious and Allergic Diseases, run by Anthony Fauci. So Anthony Fauci got all the responsibility for bioweapons development. He got at that time a 68% raise from the Pentagon in order to do that work. So, and that's why he was the highest paid official in the American government of 4 million people in the American. He gets more money. He got more money, $450,000 a year than the president. That any Supreme Court judge, any member of Congress, he was the highest paid, and it's because he got that 68% raise from the Pentagon to do bioweapons development. Now, when you do bioweapons development, every bioweapon needs a vaccine. So you develop them side by side, because in 100% of the cases when you deploy a bioweapon, there's blowback. Your side also gets sick. So in order to deploy one offensively, you need a vaccine to counter it. So you need to vaccinate your team before you deploy it. So those two things are developed through a field of science called gain of function science, where you take an infectious microbe and you amplify its infectivity, or you make it jump species, so it may kill monkeys, now you make it kill humans, and you adopt it that way. And there's all kinds of methods for that, and then you make it immune to antibiotics and to therapeutic drugs and to other therapies. So it's actually the inverse of medicine. For 2,800 years since Hippocrates, doctors have been trying to figure out how to make microbes less infectious and less deadly, and developed antibiotics and therapeutics to do that. Well, the guys who are involved in this, there's 36,000 what are called life scientists, but they're actually death scientists, who are now employed full-time in developing microbes that can be used to kill people.
But given the experience we just had 3 years ago, where a virus from a biolab overturned the world.
Let me just finish this brief history about what happened. In 2014, 3 of those microbes escaped. Fauci built labs all over the country, in Galveston and Boston, everywhere. They're BSL-4 labs. We don't even know how many there are, BSL-3 and BSL-4. We have no idea how many there are. There's, we've counted them. I have a new book coming out that goes through the ones we know. But there are many secret ones that people don't know about, and they're doing it here in the United States. But in 2014, 3 bugs escaped from 3 different labs. And they were high-profile breaks, and they were very dangerous things, smallpox and a couple of other bad microbes. The public learned about it, and there was a lot of publicity, and Congress held hearings. 300 scientists wrote President Obama and said, you've got to shut down Anthony Fauci, because he's going to create a microbe that will cause a global pandemic. And so Obama signed a moratorium that shut down the 18 worst of Anthony Fauci's experiments, where most of them were taking place in Galveston and in North Carolina by a scientist called Ralph Barrick down there. And instead of obeying that law, Anthony Fauci shifted a lot of his operations offshore. And those operations ended up, most of them in the Wuhan lab, which is a military lab, and that the Chinese run, the People's Liberation Army. And then a lot of them went to the Ukraine. So a lot of that science now, and it's funded, Fauci was funding lots of it. But then the other government agencies began to get confidence in, their ability to get away with it. And most of it is being funded by the Department of Defense. Most of all, the biggest single funder is USAID, which is, a CIA cutout.
So there you go. You're saying that Anthony Fauci was funding and creating bioweapons in Galveston, Texas, and then moved that to China. It's very interesting, what's going on here. And, depending on your viewpoints, how can he prove this? If he can prove this beyond a shadow of a doubt, it's be incredible. And it would be all over the major news channels. That's the thing. I know that this looks legit with him, this interview with him and Tucker Carlson, but this is just another YouTube channel. So we really have to think for ourselves here and get all the facts. If he could present all of this, this factual information that he's talking about, it would be front page on every newspaper all over the planet. It's interesting though, but that doesn't necessarily make it true.
Do you think the lab leak was a leak, or was it intentional?
The best science shows that, indicates that the people who were working on a particular coronavirus technology that was taught by Ralph Barrick, it was developed by the U.S. government with NIH money. It was then taught to a group of scientists, Xi Zhengli, who's famous, the Bat Lady, and then her assistant, Ben Hu, and a couple of other scientists at the Wuhan lab. Barrick taught them two things. He taught them, one, how to engineer the spike with a furin cleave that could attach to the ACE2 receptors of the human lungs and make people sick and spread, through the air. He taught them another trick that has nothing to do with public health, conceivably, which is a technique called seamless ligation, which is a technique for disguising the evidence of human